An ideal quality testing session should be 2 or more players sitting down to play a game of Pokemon with some kind of idea behind what you're doing. You don't just want 2 players to show up with their favorite decks. Like, you don't want to be like, yo, we should test for NAIC. And then you get together, whether it be online or IRL, and you show up with your Lugia deck and they show up with your Mew deck. You play 10 games and that's kind of it. You want to show up with like an idea behind what you're trying to accomplish on one side or the other. And this is why I think it is actually such a big deal within testing groups or testing with someone, that you have the idea and plan of playing the exact same 60 cards, because it's so much more efficient to be testing that way, where one of you plays, of course, one of you is going to be playing the deck that you plan on playing, and the other one's going to be testing something against that deck to try and figure out a situation or a tech card or a matchup, right? But if you both just show up with your favorite deck for the format and play games against each other, you can still have an idea behind what you're trying to do. Like, maybe one of you shows up with Lugia and you're like, I want to test the Mew matchup. So you have your testing partner, your friend, whatever, play the Mew deck against you, so on and so forth, right? But the other person, if they don't ever plan on playing Lugia, they don't really get anything out of it, right? They're like, oh, I guess they'll learn a little bit of how to play Mew, how to play the Mew against Lugia matchup. But if the deck they're playing for the tournament is Chi and Pao, then all of a sudden they're just kind of left with like nothing. That's why I think it's like really, that's why I've always liked the idea of, if you have a testing group, you should be playing the exact same 60 cards at every single tournament, because then you're on the same page and all the effort and work you're putting in is doubled times as many people as you have in the group, because you all have the same goal. So that's why I think it's like a pretty big plus to be planning to play the exact same 60 cards. But whether you're playing the exact same 60 cards as your testing partners or not, you still want to have a goal in mind as to what the point of the testing is. So like I said, the example, you're playing Lugia, you're like, hey, testing partner, I want to test the Mew matchup with this deck. I want to figure out if I need more with it or just how to properly play it consistently. So you just test that matchup. You put a goal in mind of what you're trying to do with your testing. Don't just show up with your testing partners or your friends and just play Pokemon. If your goal is to try and prepare for a tournament or improve as players, you want to put a goal behind what the purpose of playing these games of Pokemon is. If you don't have a goal behind why you're playing these games of Pokemon, then it's not that it'll be useless or you won't gain anything from it, but you'll gain so much less from the games of Pokemon you're playing, because you're not putting a reason behind why you're playing those games of Pokemon. And the other thing I would say on top of that is you should theoretically almost always play open-handed, especially if you're not, like, depending on the level of play you are. So for majority of players, average players in general, you should play open-handed with your testing partners, so that way you both can see what's going on and can discuss and talk about situations and plays. And at the very least, you should talk about situations and plays in general. Like when I do testing with my testing group, we get on Discord, we play on PTCG Live or Tabletop Simulator, and then we share our screens. So each player can see the other person's screen and see exactly what they're doing. Now, you don't want to play as if you know exactly what your opponent's hand is when you're making the decisions on your turn, but you want to be able to see it and then be able to talk through situations and plays, and it will allow you to see and get the idea of certain plays that you maybe wouldn't have thought of before, and now all of a sudden you'll tackle the situation or the matchup differently based on that. Instead of doing X when you're in situation Y every time, now maybe you'll be like, oh, well, because I see you consistently have the answer to X, I should probably be doing Z instead, right? And then you actually do Z instead, and then you get a higher level of testing through that, where both of you are playing more optimally for the situation, which will lead to the result being more closely true to what the actual outcome of that matchup should be on average, giving you the most accurate level of testing to actually know how good your deck is actually against other decks or in the meta or in the format in general, as opposed to just kind of sitting there playing closed hand, never discussing plays or talking about situations, and then you gain like so much less. Once again, you still gain some knowledge and information by simply playing a game of Pokemon, but you gain so much less, and you're just kind of stunting your growth in the game by not playing open-handed or asking questions to your testing partners or discussing lines of play and options, and like, okay, if I do this, how do you think you'll respond? It's like, okay, well, I'll probably do this if you do that. Okay, well, if I do this, then this becomes better because, yeah, and you like talk through the situation before you even play down cards or whatever. You're like, okay, if I boss here, what do you think your response to that is? It's like, well, Well, actually, because you could boss here, maybe I should have never even benched this Pokemon to begin with. So then, like, if you're in a situation where you're using, like, playing IRL or using Tabletop Simulator, you just, like, put the Pokemon back in your hand. You, like, fix the mistake, and then you play from a more optimal board state. That's, like, another thing you can do. That's one thing, like, a drawback of testing on PTCG Live or testing on PTCGO is you couldn't take back mistakes. So it could be, like, player A benches the Pokemon, and player B is like, okay, well, obviously right here, my best play is now to boss up that Pokemon. Should you not bench that Pokemon? It's like, okay, yeah, because if you're going to boss this, then I kind of just lose the trade from here, so I just shouldn't bench this. So you just take it back and put it back in your hand, or put it back in the deck if you use Nest Ball or whatever, and then you just fix the mistake, and now you play from a more optimal board state, and then once again you're getting a more optimized result of that matchup or that testing in that situation. So I would say I think it covers most things, if not everything, about like optimally testing, how to optimally test, or like push to get close to optimally testing.